Greetings and salutations, friends. My name is, of course, Charles Q. Banks, and I'd like to welcome you to another episode of Charles Anime Episode Summary and Review. And today I'm reviewing episode 9, of Kimetsu no Yaiba. And this episode is a battle episode from start to finish, which is something that hasn't really happened in this anime before. There's always some build-up and an ending before the episode ends to the action. In this one, it's just the typical shonen style, perfect shonen style battle episode that starts out with, a slight, very quick recap of the previous episode, and continues forward where it left off and doesn't end until the end of the episode. And even then, it's not quite finished. So yes, let's get into it. This episode does really remind me of a lot of battle shonen anime, but at the same time, it's really quickly paced, very fast paced. Nothing takes place other than people fighting, talking while fighting, thinking about the fight, and talking about what strategies they need to use in the fight, which is it's refreshing, I gotta say, because most of what has happened in this episode is people getting from point A to point B, training, being emotional, fighting, and then ceasing to fight, and then moving somewhere else, getting ready to fight, fighting a little bit, having a recap, going into a flashback, things that aren't really involved with the fight. This one, it is purely focused on the battle between the heroes and the villains. What we see is some very intense fighting. This show has been on a slow build for 8 episodes, and we've been seeing very slight ramps up in action and quality and in violence and gore, and we've finally made it to some pretty grotesque and horrifying stuff when it comes to the gore and the blood. I'll just spoil it for you. Watch this episode if you don't want to be spoiled for one of the more shocking moments in this anime. It reminds me a little bit of what happens in Parasite the Maxim. A guy just gets his head completely blown off by a demon Tamari ball. They just call him Tamari. And it's shocking. It's right in your face. The screen goes red, and it's just the outline, but it's like, well, their head just exploded right away. And it's the character we just saw and just were introduced to in the last episode, Yushio. And we know that he's a demon, but we don't know yet whether or not he can heal himself. And so Tanjiro is like, I have to keep Tomaya safe, at least, as well as Nezuko. And so he starts to engage fighting with the girl throwing the Tomari balls, which she's a very interesting character design, very tropic. Like, she is one of those psychotic girls who are just obsessed with playing. The idea of, this is all a game, and I want to kill you to win, and let's play all day, let's play all through the night, or until you're dead, and it's that kind of psychotic obsession with a fixation, and this happens to be with playing with Tamari balls and killing people. But at the same time, it really does get very cliched. It gets very, not boring, because this episode is not boring anything but, let me tell you. But I get tired of hearing her saying the same old tired lines, like, Asobi-yo! And it's like, stop saying that. If you've seen any other show that has a female, or any type of enemy that is obsessed with playing and just says the same moniker over and over and over, the same maxim, you know what this character is. And then the other demon character, is like a kind of a clean freak, and he's the one with the eyes in his hands, with the arrows in the eyeballs as the pupils. And he has a yellow and black kimono, and those round Buddhist ball necklaces. I can't remember what they're called right now, but giant marbles, which are really cool, I gotta say. And he's like the sniper. He stands back and uses basically telekinesis. The eyeballs, whenever he closes the eyes, they shoot out arrows, any number of arrows, and whatever sticks to the arrow gets flung in the direction of the arrow. So he prepares the direction of the arrow before he lets it fly. He lets it fly, and for instance, it wraps around Tanjiro's arm at one point, and you know what's going to happen once it continues its rotation. It just will absolutely rip his arm out of its socket and twist it into ribbons, which is a horrifying thought because it could actually happen in this anime. You don't know what to expect because the limitations have been absolutely broken by a man getting his head exploded, by a woman getting her head drilled in by a finger and turning into mush in the last episode. So it's like the stakes are really high. You're really kind of tense, waiting for some really gory stuff to go down. But of course, Tanjiro is too quick for that. He runs up a tree and flips so fast in the direction of the arrow that he's able, kind of like a Chinese finger puzzle, to go faster than it and widen the gap so that the arrow is going this way and he is going the same direction. He's able to slip out. And it's like, and he lands on his feet and it's like, oh my gosh, that was so awesome. At least that was my reaction. But there's a lot of that in this episode. A lot of really cool things. There's not a whole lot to say about the action. It's just really good action. There's no real point in going into analyzing in depth every single piece of action that happened, every choice that everyone made, because there's just a lot of stuff going on constantly. What is worth noting is that Yushio, with his demon blood, and Tomoya, who has been working on demon blood for centuries, literal centuries, because she's at least 200 years old. Who knows exactly how old she is? She hasn't specified that. She's just been working on cures for 200 years. But she's been tinkering with the blood to make sure that they are ultra healers, both herself and Yushio. And so Yushio, his head starts growing out of his neck, slowly but surely, like actually quite fast for healing. He should be dead. His head has exploded. But it's like, and it zooms in on his head too as it's growing, and you can see like the jawbones manifesting and his tongue like rippling out, the muscles being created and the teeth forming, and it doesn't fully form. His head doesn't fully form until he starts talking. It's like, how you doing that? Your brain isn't even on yet. But I guess, these are demons. Actual anatomical logic doesn't apply in the same way to demons as they do to humans. And so half of his head grows and there are little tendrils, slowly healing himself and seeking, more air upwards. And as he is talking to Tomoya and saying, we should never have trusted this Tanjiro guy. He would always lead us to trouble, and, my talismans aren't able to completely blind people to where we are, because that's how he's been doing it. That's his special talent. His blood demon talent is to be able to place a talisman with an eye inscribed on it, and whatever he puts it on will be able to be turned invisible. And so that's how he turned the house invisible. And in the course of the episode, he gives Tanjiro one of these papers with a pin. He shoots it into his forehead, which causes Tanjiro to be able to see the arrows that the guy with the eye hands is shooting out to use his telekinesis. And that's actually how the Tomari balls, which were being shot by the girl, Susamaya? I can't remember her name. Her design is pretty interesting, too. It's a little freaky because she's able to sprout 6 arms. And she like derobed, and she has a black bra underneath, just a simple wrap, and it started bulging at one point, and I was like, uh-oh, is this gonna get inappropriate? But no, it was just 4 more arms sprouting out of the sides of her chest. So like, oh, okay. But so that was pretty freaky. But she has the same type of like orange-red hair tips that Nezuko has, which is definitely a sign of demonhood, and the rest of her clothing also has that black and orange pattern to it, which is reflected in her hair, and her eyeballs are yellowish orange too. So it's like everything matches, everything is color coordinated with these demons, and they look really cool. The female, even though she's really annoying and psychotic, is really attractive to me. Yeah, just watch this episode. The action is fantastic. Although I will say this about the CGI, there were a few times, well, multiple times throughout the whole episode in which there were like split seconds of CGI. The Tamari balls, I think, were mostly CGI, but they really do not disrupt your enjoyment or your... They're not distracting, they're not jarring as 3D objects moving about the world, because you can understand them. They're perfect spheres, and they're moving like balls should move, at a faster rate than everything else, but also they're supernatural balls. They're actually parts of the girl's body that she's throwing at people. And so when they get sliced, blood comes out, which is crazy in itself. But she's able to reproduce them again and throw them. When she's doing this, she's just continually producing Tomaris, and Tanjiro is having to flip around and really sense where they're going and slice some and deflect others. And as he's doing this, doing these flips and moves, he turns into a CGI creation. You can really tell it, and it really is kind of jarring because there are multiple scenes in which he's doing crazy flips and moves of the same type later on in the episode that weren't CGI. So it's like, why was that CGI and that one not? And I guess it's just like whichever was more convenient to use CGI in, but they really wanted that ending action scene to be in traditional animation, which I really appreciate, because that ending, where he is using like the strongest form he has ever used in his water-breathing technique to create a massive wave behind his blade, which is able to catch the arrows of the eye demon and cast them back at him and behead him. And it's amazing. It's a beautiful, beautiful scene. I am just so happy with the way this episode turned out. And the same thing with Nezuko at one point. She's flipping around the balls trying to take on the girl with the Tamaris, and she turns into a CG model as well. But because it's far away, and because it's at the same rate as all the rest of the animation, I think also the balls are CG as well. So everything is basically CG, except for maybe the environment. And it all blends perfectly together. And so it works in certain scenes, and it doesn't work in others. It just depends. And I think it really depends on how much motion and how fast the characters are moving. And whether the elements of CG and traditional animation are on the same level, or if one is more than another. It's a complicated business. But for some reason, when Nezuko turned into a 3D object, she looked fine, whereas with Tanjiro, he looks like Wind Waker. He looks like Link from Wind Waker, polygonal object, and is moving around like a cartoon character, whereas he's moving more realistically realistically is relative term in terms of animation, but in the traditional animation style. You can see what I'm saying. Like, the traditional style always trumps the CG style every time, but even sometimes in this episode, because they did it so well in certain points, the CG is able to look as good as the traditional animation. It's never able to look better because the traditional animation has set the bar. That's what's happening most of the time, and whenever they want a big finish, they go for the traditional animation because that's what people will respond to more easily. That's what I think the point of this episode is for me. That's something I really like about this episode, is the use of traditional animation combined with CG animation reveals that traditional animation can go really far. And this is another thing. Most of the effects that are used in Tanjiro's special forms, his water technique especially, with the waves going after his blade, most of those effects, aside from the dark lines, which are traditionally animated, are actually CG, and the waveforms. but they work perfectly because they're supposed to be really flashy and almost supernatural looking. They look really supernatural. So it works with that, and I am fascinated with the way that they're using CGI in this show. And the water effects have always looked good, but I've never really come to terms with the fact that the water effects were always CGI. But that's exactly how they did it, and it's perfectly integrated. Yeah, well, maybe some frames of animation at the end were CG. It's hard to tell. I'm looking at it right now, and okay, that's traditional, that's traditional, that's traditional, and the final. Okay, yeah, it was all traditional. Alright, yeah, so the CG was done so well that it made me question myself as to whether the ending fight scene was actually traditional or CGI. And that means you've really done things right. If people are not able to tell that you used CG, then you've done a good job. And whether that's in animation or in real life animation, like in a, what I mean is, in a live action film, you shouldn't be able to tell that there's CGI happening. The same thing goes for Japanese animation. The styling of the animation should match the CG, and vice versa. And they're doing pretty well. There's still some moments where it's like, that's distracting, but for the rest of it, it's very effective, and you really get the impact of every hit. And something else that happens that is like really like, uh-oh, Nezuko's leg, I keep wanting to say Nazuko, but it's not Nazuko, it's Nezuko, gets shorn off by one of the balls. She tries to kick it back at the demon because that's what she does, she kicks. It's very like her. I really like her as a character, and I just wish she had a voice that she could speak words, but she's in trouble because her demonic nature has been suppressed, and so she's not able to heal herself very well. So Dr. Tomoyo has to help that with an injection. And so we know that she'll be better by, well, at some point, but it's kind of tense. We don't know how fast she's going to be able to get back up, and this means that Tanjiro is in double jeopardy now, because that ball woman is still on the move, even if Tanjiro was able to behead the second guy. And also, the question of how they're going to extract the demon blood from the bodies is a big problem, because Tanjiro's sword has light captured in it, which will cause the demons to destruct, to turn into mush and to disappear. So you cannot keep that in a jar. What are you gonna do with that? So he's already defeated the one guy. Will he be able to capture the blood of the other? That's what we don't know. So it ends on the beheading of the guy with the demon eyes, and we don't know what's gonna happen next. So this episode was great, and go watch it, it's good. I am hyped, really excited for the next episode. I'll probably just watch it right now. It's really late, I should probably go to sleep, but I'm like, so I can't say anything better about this episode. It's a 9 out of 10 for me. Yeah, and there was nothing illogical going on other than, the idea that Yushio is talking while he doesn't have his head there yet, but demon cells, who can say? Maybe they cause one to be able to live and to speak on a cellular level. Like, the brain and nervous system are distinguished from the brain and are there in the rest of the body also. But anyway, I'm just babbling now. So thanks for watching. Please leave a like and comment, and subscribe. Click the notification bell. Until next time, farewell.